I'm going to very rapidly bring people up to date with the timber markets. A little bit of history, I think it's very important. We just see where we've got to this point, look at some current trends, have a look at some outline prices, very indicative prices that we at Lockhart Garrett are looking at, and a few colleagues as well, fairly generalised, and then have a quick look at the future, what's around the corner. For those of you who don't know, I'm Justin Mumford, Director at Lockhart Garrett. We manage about 6,000 to 6,500 hectares of woodland throughout central England, East Anglia, selling a fair bit of timber. In the meantime, I'm also the regional Confor chair, so I do gather a lot of information with regards to the timber markets. At the moment, we really need to be relying on timber to provide a sustainable long-term future for the woodlands. We've heard a lot of things from Tony with regards to various options in the future, and I'll come to those in a bit, but at the moment, really, timber is key for the long-term sustainability of woodlands in terms of bringing a financial return to those woodlands. And to quote Professor Rackham, a woodland that pays is a woodland that stays. So it's very important that we see that timber, we see that return coming back into the woodland to then allow reinvestment back into the management. Excellent, we're on song. Thank you, Gary.
Just do it on the...
Okay. Just, hello, can everybody hear me all right now? Is that better? Speed up a bit better. Right, so yeah, look at the timber markets, the history, current trends, bit of pricing, and then the future, then a few key take-home figures. Prices, trends, and looking at it subjectively. We do have data. The majority of data that we get within the industry is based around the softwood market. To put it into perspective, we're currently milling just shy of 12 million cubic metres of timber, of softwood timber in this country every year. That compares to just over 2.5 million tonnes of hardwood timber. So hardwood timber market is much, much smaller than the softwood market. And as a result, we don't necessarily have the facts, the figures, the trends that could be seen as a market failure and something we do need to improve on in the future. But where are we with regards to the softwood markets? Over the past 5 years, we have seen a general climb in prices with a peak around about the mid-noughties before dropping off rapidly after the banking crisis. It's very important to say that the softwood market does echo that of the construction industry, being the main market for our softwood products. You would say, if that's the case, how come we've seen a steady climb in prices since the banking crisis? I'll come on to that in a bit. Without making you too depressed, let's have a look at it over a slightly longer scale. This is an indexed chart which shows prices back to the mid-80s and also the mid-90s, which on an index price, as you can see, were considerably higher than those that we're getting now. To a certain extent, almost double in real terms to the prices we're getting now. So in real terms, our softwood market, our softwood value has dropped off considerably. Reasons being, there's now a lot more timber being made available on the international market, particularly from the Baltic states, which came about towards the end of the 90s, excuse me, and also general globalization of prices has brought that down. But we're about here at the moment, as you can see, considerably lower in terms of real terms of what we've had in the past. So how's that affecting deliveries? We've talked about the prices and the trend in prices. Let's just have a quick look at how that's affecting deliveries. No surprise that the main markets for softwood are the sawmills, and no surprise that the deliveries echo that of the prices. When prices go up, deliveries go up. When prices go down, we shut the door and prices go down accordingly. A couple of interesting stats from this particular graph is how wood fuel is starting to pick up from round about the mid-noughties. from a relatively small market to somewhere in the region of just over 1 million tonnes per year now being delivered into that particular market. A lot of that is to some of the larger scale heat and power plants, or mainly power plants in the Borders and Northern England. So we haven't got very much detail with regards to hardwood prices, but what we have got is some relatively reliable data with regards to how much hardwood is being felled and delivered. And this graph shows how that has transpired over the past 10 years or so. Interesting to see that hardwood milling timber has dropped to a sort of stable level from about 5 years ago. Very interesting to see the increase with regards to wood fuel, in particularly the domestic firewood market that has been happening in recent years. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail later on. Another very interesting line on this graph is this pink one here, which shows deliveries into the pulp mills, which up until 2005 was an important market, particularly in the south and the west. And after the closure of only 1 or 2 mills, in particular St Regis, we saw that market all but disappear. So trends. Richard said this morning in his talk that we tend to supply 20% of the domestic market. 20% of timber used in this country comes from woodland forests in the UK. Pleased to report that that is increasing. It is now up to 42%. So UK forests are supplying 42% of the domestic demand in this country. And some analysts are predicting that that's going to continue to increase, with 1 or 2 large mills opening up in, again, the Borders to up to 48%. But why is our timber being used over and above that coming in from Scandinavia and the continent? Primary reason is that in recent years we've had a relatively weak pound compared to the euro. We've had a relatively stable pound in comparison to the Swedish krona, and as a result our timber is cheaper than that coming in from the docks. To put it into perspective, at the peak the timber, the imported timber was some £15 per cubic metre more expensive than UK timber, purely on variation of exchange rates at its peak. So it does have a huge influence on that, and it's very good to see that as a country we've been able to deliver that increased demand, and we're now supplying a good proportion of the UK mills. We want to make sure that that continues. One thing that we've been able to do as a UK industry is to provide flexibility. The mills are actually probably milling less than they have been in the past, but the UK domestic supply hasn't changed because we've been able to be flexible to a certain extent. We've been able to provide smaller quantities as opposed to those of the imports, and that's something that we want to continue now we've got hold of it. So we saw very roughly the trends that have, the trends that have been coming through in recent years. Just to bring that up to date, probably over the past 12 months, we found a stabilisation of the prices. We've been able to sell the timber, particularly on the saw log material, and if anything, that's just starting to drop off now. There's quite a bit of timber at roadside we're finding. The mills are quite full at the moment, and as their demand drops off, particularly towards the end of the year, which is a seasonal drop-off that we do see every year, I think we'll see the prices contracting slightly, but with a view to them picking up in the new year. We're finding that timber that we're selling now is probably 3, 4, up to £5 cheaper than material that we'll be putting onto the market come the new year and the spring. One interesting issue with regards to the softwood trends, particularly in this part of the world, is the ability to be able to utilise and supply some of the lower grade material that's coming out of our conifer woodlands, in particular into the horse bedding market for shavers and also into the wood fuel market. We've discussed that earlier today. If anything, If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have liked to have thought we'd probably be delivering more into that market than we are, but it's certainly there and it's a contributing factor to our sales, and I hope it will continue. We've got one or two good buyers. They've got a few good customers. They need more customers, and when they do, I think that market will help underpin what is the low-grade quality of material. Moving on to hardwoods quickly. Hardwoods in terms of hardwood milling timber, it's been relatively static probably over the past 3 years. We're finding that good oak continues to sell, and there was always a demand for good quality oak. As the grade of oak falls and we start to move into some planking and lower planking, that's when we come into competition with relatively cheap imports, particularly from France, and merchants can get milling, particularly planking, beaming timber, and to a certain extent high-grade fencing timber from the continent, almost cheap as we can deliver in. So we need to be selling quality from that side of things. Chestnut market is still buoyant for good chestnut. We've had 2 or 3 parcels of chestnut on the market over the past year, and it needs to be good. Any shake or any colour, the demand soon begins to drop off. Other species remain relatively flat, and that does include ash unless it's relatively large diameter. But at the moment, a lot of the white woods, which tend to go onto the continent, have remained relatively flat in recent years. The success story certainly has been firewood, which peaked probably about 18 months to 2 years ago. Prices up to £25 per tonne standing in some cases, and even higher. But since then, we've seen a slight drop-off, primarily as a result of a mild winter last year, and particularly a mild winter leading up to Christmas, which is when a lot of the customers tend to buy in and store up for the winter. As a result, prices have dropped off slightly. There's been a lot out there. There's been a lot of firewood at Rydeside, and I think that probably is still the case. A good cold spell actually will then change that, and I can see the price coming back up again, depending very much on what kind of winter we're expecting. So just a few sort of prices that you could expect on some of the softwood and hardwood sales this winter. Good oak can fetch up towards £300, but it does drop off when you fall into some of the beaming and fencing markets. Ash, unless it's good diameter, by that I mean sort of 24 quarter girth, sometimes gets more going into the firewood pile than it would do into the milling pile. Not the best thing, but that's where we are at the moment. And firewood prices have dropped back slightly, probably from where they were when they peaked a couple of years ago. Softwood prices there very varied depending on site, species, and extraction routes. But sawlogs sort of around about the early to mid-20s. Bars, you're looking around about sort of £10 to £12. And chip, as I say, the bottom end product, if you can find some of the specialist markets, then certainly you can be getting some reasonable returns. So just some very key things in terms of how do you get more for your money. Very important to know your timber resource, know where it is and what conditions it's in, coming back to management planning. And I think this is going to be a huge theme with the forest industry going forward. Know your woods, know your timber, and know your markets. And make sure that you utilise the tree to the best as you can. Don't simply put it all through the pulp mill or through the bar market. Look at specialist products, hurling sticks and ash, for example. If you are harvesting a lot of ash, the Irish, I know, are very concerned about this disease as they rely very heavily on our ash. Look to utilise all parts of the tree. And be clever as well with how it's marketed. Make sure that we're adding value to timber, finger jointing through chestnut, for example, glulam. One thing that came out to the Olympics in the Olympic Village was just how impressive the McDonald's was right in the middle of the village. That was a glulam structure that can be repeated and can be used elsewhere. Look to use products in-house if you can, particularly on some of the lesser conifer species, which the market is turning their nose up. We heard this morning that the mills aren't taking species that they're not used to. One of these in particular is Western red cedar, a very good timber with regards to its natural preservative qualities, and with the change in preservative rules, it makes a lot of sense to try and utilise some of your own timber if you can. And also look at the land that you've got. Try and utilise land that possibly isn't going to be possible to run a combine over, but you can grow things such as cricket-back willow. You look to utilise more land. And then also look at clever marketing. The firewood market has been very interesting in recent years, and markets, key merchants are starting to look at ways that they can make themselves different from the usual pickup load dropped off in the yard. And there's various outfits that are now kiln drying their wood, they're bagging their wood up, they're giving it an insurance scheme stamp to give the client, the customer, that confidence. And as a result, they're getting returns for it. This bag here measures in at just over 1.6 cubic metres, so probably just shy of a normal pickup load. And that's currently being marketed out of countrywide stores for £230, compared to what would you be getting on a pickup? You'd be lucky to get 150. So just shows bagged up, branded, with a certain confidence, and there's a price there. Tony touched on it, but I was finishing my talk by just saying that with regards to ensuring we deliver economic return from our woodlands in the future, we've got to look beyond timber, and I think carbon could be very interesting. These are some of the prices that have been bandied around from government sources, but if the voluntary market does pick up, and with the demand for FTSE and wider registered companies to record their carbon use, we can see a market for carbon coming forward, as well as the ecosystem services that have been mentioned. I think they're probably maybe 3 to 5 years away, possibly even more, but certainly carbon is currently being traded at the moment. It's not a huge amount, £3-4 per tonne, but I can see a lot of things around the corner that are going to make a big difference to that price. So just a few key take-home messages. Softwood prices relatively stable for 2012, although we are just seeing them falling off a bit at the moment. But I think they'll increase come 2013 as seasonal demand picks up. Hardwood prices remain stable, but there is still good money being paid for quality, and it's worth marketing that material far and wide. Firewood, although it's dropped off slightly, it's still a very important income stream to woodlands now. And I think a cold winter could see prices increase to where they were maybe 12, 18 months ago. Make sure you're getting the best out of your trees, utilising timber. And also, let's keep an eye on other future markets. Thank you.